Fingers crossed, this Marantz PMD740 is now ready to go back to its owner. So the owner got this pretty cheap from the EU. I received it kind of in bits, like these boards were attached to the chassis, but the transport was in several pieces and was separate. The CPU board was separate. A few other things had been removed. If I quickly take this off the cradle, done a little bit of work on the plastic. You can see there that that door was broken, so I fixed that. The original screws weren't sticking, so on Mike Terriel's advice, what I did was get some JB weld and push it into the hole with a toothpick, and then that gives it a new surface for the screws to grip. Both of these boards had a little bit of damage to them. This little transistor is part of how power is directed to the motor, so when I eventually got this transport reassembled, it wasn't getting any power because basically pressure had gone onto that when it was separate from everything else. It pushed the tracks away from the underside of the printed circuit board, so I had to do some jumper wires to mend that board. Similarly here, pretty much everything worked, but this little plastic thing that's making the LED stand away from the case, so it's close to a little plastic lens here and comes through. Pressure being put on that, so the base of that LED was broken, so again I had to do a jumper wire to the next component that it was attached to because the tracks in the bottom of the PCB were broken. The transport had several missing parts. There's a little piece of black plastic that fits into the underside that engages with the gears, that was missing. The spring that I'm pointing to here, that's part of how this head assembly springs back into place, that was missing. The spring that at the base of this pinch roller arm that allows that to return was missing, and it transpired that this plate was warped. I took all these parts for, I was checking, it's in a Yamaha MT120. This is a unit I haven't really got round to and had some electrical problems I didn't really want to deal with. But it didn't cost me much, so it's sort of been demoted to a spares unit anyway. So I took the parts that I needed from there and put them onto the Marantz transport. You can see that actually the transport in the Yamaha and the Marantz is the same. The extension to the chassis where the motor is mounted is in a different place on the Yamaha. But anyway, somehow the record and playback head, the wires had actually become severed, so I had to repair the cables. And then once I had all these springs and everything that was working properly, I was getting the dreaded error message. There's already a lot of videos on YouTube of people with the Yamaha getting an error message where the heads, can't remember if it's not coming up or it's getting stuck in the video. I haven't completely got to the bottom of it, but what I've sussed out is that if the various gears behind here, if they're not aligned such that the smooth parts of the gear are visible when you put the flywheel and its corresponding black gear in after a belt change, then the logic system's going to shit the bed. So you have to rotate them to a certain position and then boot the unit up. Once you've done that once, and it will stay like that and work. The capstan belt itself was dry, so that was replaced. I did a deep clean of all this. I didn't actually remove the faders, but been through all this with compressed air deoxit lubricant. Then when I first put it together and I was doing the initial playback amp tests and everything, channel 4 was like way higher. On the oscilloscope it was completely out of range, and I was having to pull back like 5 levels of magnification before it would show the complete wave on the oscilloscope screen. And when we were looking at it, and it was a square wave rather than a sine wave like it should be. So clearly the channel 4 playback amp was producing much more gain than it should have been. So the lower boards had a partial recap. You can see all the caps and so on are replaced there. Then when I put it together again, smelt burning, and it turned out that this was almost so hot I burned myself, this heatsink. This is a 5 volt regulator, this is a 9 volt regulator. The 9 volt regulator was overheating, and I was thinking about this in a completely wrong way, and I was like, alright, it must be something to do with the power supply. So, I mean, previously this had been loose, so these had been resoldered, these sockets here. I know you can't, let's move this down slightly. This is where the DC power comes in, and that was a little bit intermittent. So this is why you've got this white shielding. Originally there was shrink wrap on there. But I redid that. I measured the power supply and got very confused by that because I was getting 17 volts DC when it should be 12 volts DC. As I say in these videos, I'm not like an official engineer. I don't have any academic background in it. So I went on a bit of a wild goose chase before I remembered that there are regulated and unregulated power supplies. This power supply on this is unregulated, meaning that it's designed to produce 12 volts at a specific load. So if you were to measure it as I did without anything attached, then yeah, the voltage is going to be higher because it's not driving anything. When I reattached it, then yeah, it was producing pretty much bang on 12 volts. I spoke to my mate Robin and he kind of put me straight the logic to thinking about it, which is that this is a passive component, not an active component. The reason it's overheating is because something downstream of it, if you like, was drawing too much current. And basically there's a bit of clear plastic, you'll see me take it out earlier, that separates this board from the one below it, the mixer board from the record playback board. And I'd forgotten to put that back in. So I think what was happening was the 9-volt rail on this board was touching probably one of the cases of one of the inductors, variable inductors underneath here, all of which are connected to ground. So there was a big current going to ground instead of a small current going to the op amp, so there was no sound, and then there was more current coming through this 9-volt regulator than it is designed to take, and that's why it was heating a lot. So although it's inconvenient because it gets in the way of the trim pots when you're calibrating, you can have the bit of shielding that's attached to this corner here just dangling down. That's not really going to be too critical for calibration purposes, but you must leave that piece of plastic in and lift it up and put it back down every time you change one of the trim pots down here, like the playback, EQ and level are here, but you need to leave that piece of plastic on top of them or that will fuck with you the way it fucked with me. What else? Getting this case back on's a real palaver. There's all sorts of things to get lined up. I was confused for a while because I had these two switch caps mixed up. They're different heights because there's a bit more space in the case, this area case, than this one, so that wasn't shunting properly. It's possible to bend these little LED standoffs so they're not lined up with a little lens on the upper part of the case. It's possible that this spring that provides electrical continuity from the metal front panel to here not to be lined up. The edges of this back plate can end up not slotted into the plastic slots in the upper part of the case, so that's a pain. But yeah, on my 6th or 7th shot of that case, when I finally thought I'd got everything lined up, I was noticing I was getting this kind of microphonic thing touching the metal plate. So I've done a bunch of investigating, and what I found is that, I'll take this off the cradle again here, these cables going down to here, these are for the insert socket in each channel. This is roughly how the cable was laid out when I first received it. It goes in this kind of reverse S shape. For cable 3 though, I've run it in a different way, because what I found is if I run it around here the way it was originally, if I were to touch that, it would rustle coming out the line out. If I had the cable up like this, where it wasn't running through all these components, nothing was microphonic. But if I laid it a certain way, not only would it make a louder rustling when I was touching this non-conductive shielding on this wire, if I like tapped the plastic shafts with the potentiometers, that was sending all sorts of like crackle and garbage out of the line out in the headphone socket as well. I don't know if you can see here, but like this area, I've recapped all of that. I've actually replaced this op amp here. The same op amp appears in a 424 Mark III. I've got a junk one of those, so that's been replaced. And despite replacing those components, this problem was manifesting again when just before I was about to shoot this video. So that's why I was running this cable a different way, and that seemed to get around the problem. But now, of course, it's stopped. I mean, I have had this wire off and attached the two ends of it to the continuity tester on my meter, giving that a wiggle around in case there's something actually broken in the cable, but the cable seems to be fine. So it's just kind of bizarre. I don't really understand what's happening there. I think the best I can do is just lay that wire in a way that I know that it's not going to happen again. If anyone watching this has got some kind of insight into what this kind of weird thing where this cable was creating rustle depending on how it was laid down in the board, what that might be, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.